May 5th is the day that's going to stick with the men and women of this police department for their entire careers. A monster, I mean monster, comes to mind, somebody with no soul. This was a promising family, a great family. I got the phone call from my neighbor, Christopher Coleman, probably around 10 to 7 in the morning. He told me that he was on his way home from the gym. He was crossing the JB Bridge. He said, "I'm calling Sherry, but nobody's answered the phone. She should be up." I told him, "Okay. You know, I'll go over and check. I'm going to get somebody over there." This was a turn from the threats they had been receiving that he had reported to us. My name is Justin Barlow. I was a detective sergeant for the Columbia, Illinois, Police Department. I also happened to be a neighbor. I went to the front door, just looking in, but I couldn't see anything. After that, I went from the front of the house to the basement area. This is the basement of the home, where we found an open window. I came in through the hallway, up the steps. These steps basically lead into the kitchen. The first thing I remembered was the smell of spray paint. We turned to the left and saw the message that was left, a lot of helter-skelter type messages, Manson-style spray paintings on the wall saying, "Punished." It started with email threats, then moved to written threats. Police were involved. When I read the letter, it was very specific about killing the family. "I will kill your wife and children in their sleep." Then we started going up the staircase to the bedroom, to the second floor of the house. As you're walking up the steps, you see this message, "You have paid." This message was leading to what we were going to find upstairs. It wasn't going to have a good outcome. At the top of the stairs, we found 3 bedrooms. To the left of the staircase was the master bedroom, where we found Sherry Coleman. To the right was Garrett's bedroom, where he was found in his bed. And Gavin, we found him in the 3rd bedroom. All 3 were deceased. It was a homicide scene. We had an active death investigation. Who was responsible? Why it happened, when it happened. If you don't believe in evil, I hope you do now. A mother and her 2 sons had been strangled in their sleep. This touched an entire community. They took it very personally. And that's something you'll never forget. As a reporter, we thought with the prior threats, that was going to be a very good lead for us, who had such hatred for Chris Coleman. That's where our investigation was going to start. This is Columbia. Innocent women and children get murdered in their beds at night. I'm Maureen Marr. Tonight on 48 Hours, the writing on the wall. On the morning of May 5, 2009, Christopher Coleman returned home from the gym to a scene of chaos and unimaginable horror. They walked him outside through the garage. He sat down on the driveway and started sobbing, said he felt like he was going to throw up, and then kind of curled up in the fetal position. I'm Maureen Marr. Tonight on 48 Hours, the writing on the wall. Justin Barlow of the Columbia Police Department had been the Coleman's neighbor for 5 years. He was the first to respond when Chris could not reach his wife. This crime scene wasn't bloody, but that didn't mean it was less gruesome. Were you at all prepared for what you were about to walk into? I don't think anybody could be prepared for that. Upstairs, where they should have been safe in their beds, were 31-year-old Sherry and the couple's 2 young boys, 11-year-old Garrett and 9-year-old Gavin. What is the lasting image you have in your mind from that day? I would say the one that sticks out the most would probably be Garrett, just because he's the one that I, discovered. Is that a haunting image for you, even as a police officer? Yeah, a little bit. Miller had not only taken Garrett's life, but had desecrated the body by leaving another disturbing message. The spray paint in his room was actually on the sheet that was over his body. There were also remnants of the spray paint on him as well. We knew that this case was going to be, probably, the biggest one of our lives. Columbia, Illinois, is a quiet suburb outside of St. Louis, a wonderful place to live and raise a family. Chief Joe Edwards immediately recognized that his department needed help, so we called in the major case squad. which brought in an army of 25 seasoned cops. It's typically your smaller departments that need the resources and help, and they swung into high gear. The SCI team started processing the house. Warrants were secured to go through the Coleman's phones and computers, while a very distraught Chris was taken to the police station to give his statement. "Let's do everything we can for this man," investigators said. Chris told investigators that it had been a normal morning. "What time did you leave your house to go to the gym this morning?" they asked. He replied that he got up and left for the gym around 5:40 a.m. He said he had called Sherry numerous times to wake her up. At 6:52 a.m., the bodies of Sherry Coleman and her sons were discovered. As neighbors woke to the news of the murders, they were both devastated and terrified. Vanessa Rigarex, who lived down the street, said the Colemans appeared to have a perfect life, raising their two beautiful sons. "I always thought of them as the American family, the perfect family. Everybody would want their children to be like these two boys, polite, always helpful. They had a heart of gold." The couple had been married for 12 years and met when they were both in the military, training in the K-9 unit. Sherry became a stay-at-home mom. 32-year-old Chris, the son of a preacher, used his Marine and security experience to land a job for a well-known televangelist, Joyce Meyer. Meyer was known throughout the country and the world as a leading voice in the evangelical movement. "Jesus died to set us free," she often proclaimed. Her organization was also quite successful financially. "I've seen figures from $50 to $100 million a year," said reporter Nick Pister, who followed the case for 2 years and was a CBS News consultant. Joyce Meyer's widespread popularity and wealth made her a high-profile figure, and thus she wanted heightened security. Chris Coleman, as her head of security, was apparently a prime target. In November 2008, Chris began receiving death threats via his work email. Whenever Chris Coleman reported the first death threat to the police department, it read, "Tell Joyce to stop preaching the bull. If I can't get to Joyce, then I will get to someone close to her." In response, the police gave the Coleman family extra patrols, just to make sure nobody was lurking around. The escalating seriousness of these threats naturally raised concerns for the police and neighbors alike. Did it concern you, as a neighbor living so closely, when you heard that there were death threats being made to the guy who lived across the street?" asked a reporter. "Absolutely," replied Barlow. The notes continued to escalate, and on April 27th, less than a week before the murders, a final message arrived with an ultimatum: "Stop today or else. I know your schedule. You can't hide from me forever. I'm always watching. I know when you leave in the morning, and I know when you stay at home." Barlow, in a bid to be proactive, decided to install cameras at his house. "We mounted a camera up in my 5-year-old's bedroom and pointed it right at the mailbox," he said, hoping to capture whoever was leaving these notes. The Coleman residence was about 214 feet away, and they hoped to get a clear shot of the culprit. But despite their efforts to be prepared, just days later, the unimaginable happened. Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were brutally murdered in their own home. If the murders were tied to the threats and Joyce Meyer Ministries, it raised fears that the cops might now be in a global search for suspects. There was an underlying terror that a killer might be out there targeting families, and people were frightened. Who was going to be next? Many wondered. My prayer over this town, that there would be healing, that mercy would come toward whoever that poor soul is who went to this extreme, and that Colombia could begin to heal again, said a local community leader. The entire community was in shock. Neighbors remembered seeing the young boys playing touch football with their father on the front lawn. These were little boys that they knew. The pain was visible on everyone's faces. It was devastating. The small town of Columbia, Illinois, was reeling from the sudden loss of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman. Close friends, like Kathy LaPlante, were heartbroken. Sherry was a loving mother, a loyal friend, and a sister to me. My life's not the same without her. There's a hole in my heart. If I had known for even 1 millisecond that she was in danger, I would have been there," she said tearfully. For Sherry's brother Mario and their mother Angela, it was impossible to accept the brutal reality. She grew up to be a beautiful person, on the outside as well as the inside. Her boys were her world, Angela said. Garrett was more quiet, a thinker. You could tell just by looking into his eyes that he was always thinking. And Gavin, well, he was outgoing, a social butterfly, just like his mom. The major case squad continued pursuing their strongest lead, finding whoever wrote those threatening letters. They tracked down people across the country who didn't like Joyce Meyer, interviewing them to see where they were on May 4th and May 5th, 2009. However, despite exhaustive efforts, none of these leads materialized. Meanwhile, investigators turned their focus back to Chris Coleman. As they continued questioning him, they were taken aback by his behavior. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, Chris seemed unusually calm. "How do you think they died?" they asked him. "You guys haven't told me," he responded. "Do you have any clues?" Oddly, he never asked how his wife and children died, which struck detectives as strange. "What else sticks out in your mind from those first few hours?" Barlow was asked later. "Just the lack of reaction," he said. "Just the lack of curiosity about what was going on." Investigators kept probing into Chris's life. "Was there a problem in your relationship?" they asked. "Was there anything that wasn't going well?" Chris replied, "Not really. I mean, maybe the communication level wasn't the best, but everything was fine." They then asked him if he was seeing anyone else. Chris adamantly denied having a relationship outside of his marriage, which made his next statement all the more shocking. Out of nowhere, Chris mentioned another woman, Tara from Florida. "I've talked to her a lot lately," Chris admitted. Investigators pressed him further. "Is this a friend? Is there something more to it?" Chris claimed they were just friends, explaining that he had met Tara through Sherry when the family went to Florida on vacation. "I didn't want to do that to my kids," Chris insisted, denying any romantic involvement, but detectives were skeptical. During the interview, the major case squad contacted police in St. Petersburg, Florida, where Tara lived. Detective Shannon Halstead was tasked with interviewing Tara, and what she uncovered changed everything. Tara handed over her BlackBerry and laptop, which contained emails, videos, and messages between her and Chris, clearly documenting an affair. "Did you immediately step out and call St. Louis?" Halstead was asked. "Yes, I did," she responded. "What did you say?" I said. "I'm not positive, but I think this is his girlfriend." Armed with this information, Detective Barlow confronted Chris. "One thing I want to tell you," Barlow began, "is that the St. Petersburg Homicide Unit is talking to Tara right now. They're showing us pictures that you sent her, and we know you guys have had an affair." This revelation was a major break in the case. Investigators learned that Chris and Tara had begun their relationship over fall of 2008, 6 months before the murders. Chris would fly Tara out to various locations where he worked for Joyce Meyer, often meeting in secret. When questioned about the affair, Chris admitted that he and Tara had traveled together to Hawaii and other locations. Tara even had a scheduled wedding date with Chris, along with shared credit card accounts. She sincerely believed Chris was going to leave his wife and children to marry her. Chris's parents, Pastor Ron Coleman and his wife Connie, were devastated by the news of the affair, but they steadfastly believed that it had nothing to do with the murders. "He's always been a gentle person, quiet and kind. There's no way Chris could have done this," they said. "You couldn't put something around your kid's throat unless you're a monster," Pastor Ron said tearfully. Despite the affair, the investigators didn't have enough evidence to charge Chris, so after 6 long hours of interrogation, Chris Coleman walked out a free man. "It wasn't like we were wanting to believe. Hey, Chris did this," said one of the detectives. It's just that the evidence kept pointing to him. In the days following the murders, the community rallied together. A memorial was set up in the subdivision where the Colemans lived. There was a bench and trees planted in their honor. Every day, friends and neighbors are reminded of the beautiful lives that were stolen from them. Megan Turnbow, a neighbor, said. The community wanted to do something positive, and this was a fitting tribute. However, the funeral for Sherry and her boys, held at Pastor Coleman's church, was a stark contrast. No friends, no family, no coaches. Nobody spoke about these three amazing people who were gone, a mourner said. As the days passed, any remaining sympathy for Chris began to fade, especially as more information about his affair with Sherry's high school friend, Tara, came to light. When I found out about the affair, I had no idea. It felt like every day was getting stabbed in the heart by these little pieces of information, a friend of Sherry said. People in the community began to wonder when Chris would be arrested, and many were eager to see justice served. The major case squad felt the pressure to solve the case. Obviously, in any case, you want to get the person responsible, but you want to get the right person, one investigator explained. Still, there were red flags surrounding Chris's story. For one, police found a basement window open and others unlocked. Here's a guy whose family is being threatened. He knows someone's out to destroy his family while he's gone. Yet that window is left unlocked, noted an officer. It became apparent that the window had been intentionally left unlocked because there was no sign of forced entry. Barlow had installed a camera in his house, pointed at the Coleman residence, but it hadn't captured anything unusual. You saw no strangers walking up and down the street. You saw no strange vehicles, Barlow said. Even more suspicious was that Chris had installed his own surveillance system in his house, but when police went to review the footage, the recorder was mysteriously missing. That's convenient, remarked one detective. An autopsy on Sherry revealed that she had fought violently before her death, sustaining to black eyes. Sherry had been involved in a struggle before she was murdered, but the two boys hadn't shown signs of fighting back, possibly because they were asleep when it happened. This made the scratches found on Chris Coleman's arms all the more suspicious. When did you first notice the scratches on his arms? Barlow was asked. It was brought to my attention by people at the scene, he replied. Police observed that Chris tried to conceal the scratches during his interview, asking for a blanket because he claimed he was cold. The only part of his body he covered was the suspected marks on his arms, one officer recalled. Chris later claimed that he had gotten the scratches the day before while removing a satellite dish from his roof. But as the investigation deepened, more damning evidence began to surface. On Chris's phone and computer, investigators found X-rated photos and videos exchanged between him and Tara Lentz. The affair wasn't just casual. It was serious. Chris had meticulously documented everything about Tara, her measurements, her favorite things, everything. He had even written down the day he believed his life changed. November 5, 2008, the day he met Tara. For police, this date set off alarm bells. Investigators noticed that the death threats against Chris's family began arriving only 9 days after November 5. Could the timing be a coincidence? Chris's parents, Pastor Ron and his wife Connie, believed so. They maintained that the affair had no connection to the murders, but the police thought otherwise. It wasn't just the timing, it was the nature of the threats. As one detective pointed out, nobody else received threats like this. Nobody else had a family that was being threatened. A forensic analysis of the threatening letters and emails revealed that they hadn't been sent by an anonymous killer at all. Instead, the emails were traced back to Chris's own laptop. Investigators discovered that the emails, supposedly sent to Chris as threats, had originated from his computer. The Gmail account used to send the threats "Karma destroy Chris" at gmail.com had been created on his device. Defense attorney Bill Margulis insists someone else could have sent the threats. Anybody that had access to his computer, whether it was a co-worker or anyone else, could have created that account. The investigators still had no so-called smoking gun, no DNA, no murder weapon, and no eyewitness. But after analyzing the blood-red paint used in the frightening messages on the walls, they believed they might have something close to it. One can of that exact spray paint was purchased at a local hardware store, and the computerized receipt showed it was bought by Christopher Coleman. You cannot paint that much without paint being somewhere on you, the prosecution argued. They had literally scrutinized him to the point where Coleman pulled his own hair out during questioning. However, there was not a trace of paint found on him. Yet, if Coleman was the killer, the surveillance video recorded the afternoon before the bodies were discovered made the crime seem all the more chilling. It showed a perfect suburban scene. Chris playing catch with his son outside the house. The next morning, the family was dead. It was unexplainable. Of course, Coleman did not take the stand. One juror commented, "I didn't want to believe that he could do that. I cried myself to sleep. It was gut-wrenching for everyone involved." As it turns out, the jury felt the same. The hate displayed in the crime was unimaginable. There's just so much hate. It's just hatred spread everywhere, another juror said. In fact, the first vote inside the jury room was 7-5, not guilty. However, it wasn't because the jurors believed Coleman was innocent. We all thought he did it. Who else would have done it? One juror explained. But many jurors were troubled by the circumstantial nature of the case. You wanted factual, tangible evidence that said he did it. Make him prove it, they demanded. As deliberations entered the second day, crowds began to gather outside the courthouse, the tension mounting. But Sherry's mother remained optimistic. "We will get justice for my daughter and for my grandsons. I have what they call mother's instinct. I'm very confident." Incredibly, it was the jurors' own detective work that they say pushed them over the top. When they looked at the back of a picture of Chris Coleman and Tara Lentz kissing, they noticed it was dated October 21st, 2008. I think what I said was, "Oh my God." And then I asked, what was the day he said the affair started? One juror recalled. The dates didn't match. Coleman had said the affair began in November, but the picture was taken in October, well before that. What did that say to you? One juror asked. That was something black and white in front of my face that said, if he could lie about this, he's lying about everything, another replied. After 15 hours of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict in the Chris Coleman triple murder trial. The verdict was guilty. Chris Coleman was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. I had never seen anything like what happened on the lawn of the courthouse that night, one observer said. The verdict was handed down on May 5, 2011, 2 years to the day that Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were found murdered. As I walked out of the courtroom, the first words out of my mouth were, "Yes, we did it. We got justice." The judge sentenced Coleman to life in prison, in part because the state of Illinois had repealed the death penalty just months before the trial. When pressed further about how he could love his wife while having an affair with one of her best friends, Coleman gave a cryptic response. "As far as with my wife, you know, from the physical side of things, it wasn't right, but I still absolutely loved her." Coleman also denied planning to divorce Sherry to marry his mistress, Tara. So why does Tara say he told her he was serving divorce papers to Sherry? Coleman admitted, "I would apologize to her about that. That was a lie. I lied to Tara about that." When asked who he thought might have killed his family, Coleman said, "I've spent 2.5 years trying to figure that part out. I just had to stop and give it to God, just release it, and do my best to forgive whoever did this." Forgiving and moving on has been incredibly difficult for Sherry's friends, who continue to struggle to understand the crime. As a Christian, I feel like it's imperative that I forgive, because Jesus forgave me, Kathy LaPlante explained. But what makes it so hard is that they were so innocent. Forgiving and moving on has been incredibly difficult for Sherry's friends, who continue to struggle to understand the crime. As a Christian, I feel like it's imperative that I forgive, because Jesus forgave me, Kathy LaPlantier explained. But what makes it so hard is that they were so innocent.